All right, welcome back. Time for another video. Again, I'm trying to squeeze a few of these in while I have a few minutes. This time we're going to talk about the conversion of a stereo Roberts Akai reel-to-reel 1700 series tape recorder into a low watt guitar amp. I'll get into the circuit details in a little bit, but overall, I converted this tape recorder into a combination of the 57 Deluxe and the VHT Ultra in a 6 or 7 watt version. Before getting into the conversion, I thought it might make some sense to talk a little bit about the Roberts Akai company and why this tape recorder is an appropriate donor to make this amp. Um, Roberts basically was an American company in the 1950s that was one of the first in the audio realm to start utilizing Japanese-made components to help reduce cost. And they partnered with a company called Akai that initially helped them power their phonographs and then moved into other devices, including the reel-to-reel. This started in the late 1950s with a model that they labeled the 900, which was loosely based on the Ampex 600. Their goal was to make it affordable and make it be produced in Japan. Akai continued to make audio equipment in the reel-to-reel format up until the mid-80s, and several of what they eventually came up with were pro-level tools. But there's a long period of time between the late 50s and mid-70s where they had very affordable tape recorders before the cassette and other formats overtook that. The model that I utilized was a mid-60s 1700 series, actually the 1710 to be specific, and the circuit utilized all tube with two 6AR5 power tubes set up in a stereo single-ended configuration. Now for my conversion, instead of having two different channels, I put it together as a single channel but in push-pull configuration, and we'll go more into that in a bit. And here's a quick gut shot from the manual, just showing what the chassis of the amplifier looks like. As you can see, it's flanked by two 6x9 speakers. As a side note, the 6AR5 power tubes are very similar to the 6AQ5 power tubes, for which there are a lot of schematics out there so that one can produce a low-powered push-pull amp for guitar. An example of this is shown here where Terry at D-Labs used 6AQ5s and push-pull to do the Princeton circuit. All right, so the quick and dirty summary of how this conversion is going to work is you're going to take an obsolete tape deck and we're going to convert this into a great guitar tube amp. And then for the circuit of choice, we're going to use the 5E3 57 Deluxe as the roadmap and then incorporate the modifications and upgrades that Steve Fryette put into the VHT, including the Ultra preamp circuit for an extra gain stage. A nice feature in this amp design is that of a boost switch. By basically putting in a raw switch that enables or disables a hidden TMB tone stack that's fixed, essentially allowing you to go between the 60s sound of the Princeton and then the raw sound of the 57 Deluxe. In a very practical design move, this is enabled simply by being able to connect or disconnect to ground as opposed to having to involve relays or other complicated switching methods. Finally, utilizing the other half of the triode that would have been the other channel, they're able to add an extra gain stage, which sits in front, similar in fashion to the way that the JCM 800 does for those Marshalls. Finally, I designed the output section to utilize the 6AR5 tubes that came with the amp, as we discussed earlier, and this is the configuration including the grid leak resistors. I used what they do at D-Lab as a nice roadmap for that. To make life easier, as opposed to going point to point, I made myself an eyelet board. Here's a nice picture of how that came out. Eventually, I had some of these made by Hoffman, but for this build, I just did it by hand. For the build, I decided to repurpose the cabinet and chassis, utilizing the original 9 and 7 pin tube sockets. Took a little bit of work. I was able to keep the power transformer. Unfortunately, I needed to lose the two single-ended output transformers. Again, following Deluxe design, there's a Hammond that I put in there, and it was easily able to handle the two 6AR5s. And now for some pictures of the final assembled unit. This is the system when you look at the front of it. It looks fairly stock. I did remove the motor, so it's much lighter. And then as we move to the next picture, you'll see where the raw switch is, accompanied by the phone jack that you can use a foot switch to turn on and off. Again, as I mentioned before, that gives you that nice chime of the 60s, or it goes nice and raw like an original Tweed Deluxe. Finally, I put a handle on top so it could easily be transported around. And then after looking at this side, we can take a look at the back. This is actually where we turn it on and off. You'll see I added an IEC switch combo there. I also have an 8 and 4 ohm jack for speakers. Finally, this is the bottom where you can see the assembly of the eyelet board. Something I didn't mention before, but I always think is a nice feature on any tape deck is that of the view meters. And I set these view meters up so they both work. One works at a higher volume and one works at a lower volume. And now time to test it out. I have a few different sound samples here where I go clean and I go dirty without using the extra upfront gain stage, and then I use the upfront gain stage. These are all going through the 4 ohm tap into a pair of 10-inch speakers that came out of a Hammond S6 organ. Maybe at some point I'll do a video about that, but you can see here I was able to build a small cabinet in Reaper. All right, you'll need to excuse the poor playing, but here we are with the normal channel, meaning no extra gain stage, both in clean mode and then with the raw switch engaged. Now we'll add some crunch to that with that raw switch. And finally, going into the additional gain stage, you can hear with lower volumes, you still get a lot of great crunch out of this amp. And now for a quick summary of this conversion. So as we discussed, it's a Roberts Akai 1710W, and we've converted the circuit so that it can work for guitar. I was able to utilize the stock cabinet and chassis. Didn't really get into the details about how I fit that stuff in there, but if you have questions, please let me know. Circuit I went with is the hybrid of the 5E3 57 Deluxe and the VHT circuit, including the Ultra portion. I used the 7-pin 6AR5 tubes, which were stock with the unit, and I put them together in a push-pull format. It's got the nice raw switch added that comes standard on those VHTs. I did an IEC power switch combination, upgraded to a push-pull output transformer, and was able to utilize the view meters so that they go along while you play. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Please let me know if you have any questions.